afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, our driving concerns tips for building a comprehensive transportation safety plan. Just a couple of things before we get started. You do have the ability to type a question in the chat box to either everyone or to myself or Lisa individually. You can make your selection using the drop-down function. At the conclusion of the training, you will be asked to complete an evaluation that will be provided in the chat box. Because this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any issues during the training, please type in the chat box or email me at deanne.crane@nsc.org. I want to welcome your presenter this afternoon, Lisa Robinson, Senior Program Manager with the National Safety Council. Her contact information will be available on the last slide. And with that, I want to welcome Lisa. And as I turn it over to her to begin, please make sure that your audio and your video are muted so that the presentation is smooth and doesn't have a lot of buffering. So with that, I welcome Lisa and I turn it over to her to begin.
Thank you, Deanne. And Deanne, if you know of any difficulties as we're going, just let me know. Thank you guys for joining me today. You know me, if you've sat on any of my webinars or any of the classes I've ever done or any of the times I've spoken, I get pretty passionate when we talk about safety and transportation. And probably this might be one of the favorite things I have to talk about because I love talking about transportation, but I believe you got to think about why you're doing it and how to be effective, because it's great to know the information, but if you don't really make it effective, we're really not doing any good. So let's kick it off here and let's talk about a few things. Again, I'm sure the majority of you know that the leading cause of work-related fatalities and injuries, is transportation, right? So why is it important? We know it's costly and it's the leading cause. So transportation safety, it should lead what you're doing, right? It shouldn't really be an afterthought, but there's a reason why we're doing it. And so I'm sure the majority of you already know that, but let's talk about some other things that you need to know. Due to the National Safety Council injury faction, they're estimating that about 90% of crashes involve human error, okay? What I want to say about that is within our control, okay? So when people use the word accident or oops, it was just an accident, and I talk to a lot of employers and they talk a lot about striking fixed objects. Again, remember, about 90% of crashes involve human error. So that is something that we can control. And so when we start thinking about our safety program, in transportation specifically, we need to keep that in mind that probably about 90% of those crashes are going to involve human error. And so understanding and knowing that are really key when you think about what you do to be effective. It's costly, okay? No doubt about it. Lost work days, productivity, fringe rates, off the job is just as impactful, the family members. So when we think about having a transportation safety program, we've really got to think about a really comprehensive, and we've really got to think maybe about things a little bit differently, because why do it? I know every company, they're looking at their bottom line, they're looking at their costs, the decisions that they make, but we know that when employees aren't at work, that's lost work days, it's it's productivity, it's money, it's that bottom line. And if a crash occurs during the workday, now again, we know that liability and a lot of other things come into play. So it's costly. So having a transportation safety program that's effective and is beneficial for your company is so important. One of my favorite things I like to say is this expression, we've always done it this way, I do not like. I'm one of those people that's an outside the box thinker. And so a lot of times, we've always done it this way. And I'm somebody who pushes the envelope a little bit. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. Sometimes it doesn't. But, using that, we've always done it this way. And I always like to say, if you've always done it that way, is it working for you, right? Are you still getting the same results? Because if you've always done it that way, you're probably going to get the same results. And sometimes you might be in a meeting and everyone's like, well, our numbers haven't changed. I don't understand. Well, we've changed people in this role. Well, maybe you change people in the role, but maybe you train them to do the job the same way. And so you have to really think about, is it working for you? And it's really important that you stop and you think about that, because if you've always done it the same way, you're probably going to get the same results. And if your goal is to get different results, you may have to do things a little bit differently, right? And so I always tell people safety is not sexy. A lot of people end up in the safety industry, and that really wasn't their plan. And I can tell you, I know a lot of people who've said, well, I was assigned safety in addition to my other role. Well, this is my job, but I've also been assigned safety. Or, yeah, I'm also taking on the role of safety. So I find that a lot of times safety becomes something that's extra, maybe an afterthought. And you know what? Nobody really always likes safety. Most people want to hide from safety. Very few people are like Horshack here, and they just cannot wait to go to a safety meeting. I don't know many people that are so excited that they get to go to a safety meeting that day. Most people are thinking, another talking head. Sorry, I've got a doctor appointment. They want to avoid it, or they're doing something else during the safety meeting because they just haven't really been enjoyable. Nobody really likes safety. But what I've got to say to that is, why not? Why don't you make your safety fun? Why don't you look at how to make it effective, but also where the employees aren't like dodging it, where they're a part of it? So I just really want to say that we know it's not sexy. We know sometimes it's mandatory. We know that it's required, but does it have to be horrible in addition to required? Absolutely not. I always say, think outside the box. I'm an outside the box thinker, as I mentioned earlier, and you can do things differently and you can be more effective. I always tell people, you can look at a roadmap and there can be how many different ways to get from point A to point B or point A to point Z, right? It doesn't matter where you talk about going. But when you look at that roadmap, there's a lot of different routes you can take to get there. And you know what? You're still going to get to your ending point, no matter what route you take. And so I always tell people, there's not one right way, but you want to find the ways that are the most effective. Because your goal is to be effective, or why do it, right? And so thinking differently is a really important component in changing your transportation safety plan and your program and having a safe company. And data should drive what you do. A lot of times I'll ask people, so why are you doing that? What's the impetus? Well, my manager told me to do it. Okay. So why are you doing it? What's driving it? If you don't know your data, you probably want to go back and figure out what your data is. Do you have a lot of this incident? What are your incidents, right? Do you have a lot of striking fixed objects? What exactly do you see a pattern of? It's great to have a transportation safety program that's all-encompassing and have a lot of different topics and a lot of different information, but you also need to know where might you have the most issues or the most incidents that you need to think about how you address it. Is it one particular department? So really the data should be something that you're consistently looking at to help you plan to be effective, because sometimes you'll have a great safety program and it may be fabulous, but it's not hitting where you need it to hit because it's not addressing your data points. And so it's really important that you make sure that you've got that ebb and flow. I work on grants and our team works on grants, and sometimes we get challenged because we find that at different times, different things happen. But that's what happens in the world we work in. We have that ebb and flow. And so understanding that your safety program should follow the ebb and flow for you as well, and that you know what your data does. That's an important feature. So why? Why are you doing it, right? Is it because we have to have safety? It's a position. Well, we know we're doing it first and foremost because safety, right? Safety's, we know that that's why we're doing it, right? But the employees matter. They are your best asset and they matter completely. We also know that incidents are costly. We're talking whether it's money, liability, citations. We're also doing it because of profitability and the bottom line. Every company that I've talked to or any employees, they talk about the bottom line drives every decision. Even in safety, there isn't a decision that occurs in safety sometimes without talking about the cost. And so you have to understand we're doing it because that bottom line, it dictates that we do. But understanding that, again, incidents are costly and getting ahead of them actually saves you money. And knowing that your employees are your best asset, but your employees need to know that they believe they are your best asset. Your employees need to know that they matter, and that's why you are making safety important at the company. So who's responsible for safety? I like to ask this question because sometimes somebody goes, well, it's this person because they are head of this. Or it's, well, every department has a safety leader. But I want to remind you that everybody in a company is responsible for safety. We all have a responsibility. Whether we talk about coworkers that ride in a vehicle with somebody, it doesn't matter if coworkers are at a site and we see what's going on. Every one of us is responsible for safety. And so we have to think about how we empower people and how we get our employees to think about safety differently. Instead of thinking of it as a burden, how do we think of it as, okay, this is an opportunity, right? We want them to view it differently. So again, everyone is responsible for safety. So what should your program be? It should be impactful and it should be effective. And I always say, or why do it? And everyone I work with will tell you I use the or so what. I'm really big about saying or so what, because to me that's kind of my meter. That's my check. My checking meter is so what. So if you're not impactful, you're not effective, you're doing it the way you've always done it, you're going to get the same results, right? And if you're trying to drive down your numbers, drive down your costs, you've got to think about your program having impact and being effective instead of just doing it because that's what safety dictates we do. It's got to be forward facing. I know a company that they felt like they were constantly chasing their incidents. And they finally realized, because they had used some drive cams and some other things, but they finally realized they had a very high rate, about a 75% rate of people not using their passenger restraints or seat belts. And so they started going forward facing, getting ahead of it, and leading with safety and leading with these incidents. And they found all of a sudden they were able to get ahead of it. And they got tired of chasing it. So you want to always look forward where you want to be instead of always getting your incident reports and addressing them. Okay, it should be a priority. A lot of times, and I talk to a lot of people, and safety sometimes feels like an afterthought, something that's required. It's a burden. I cannot tell you how many people will tell me, I don't know anything about safety. I got assigned to do this. Well, that's not a priority. So that's a really important key and a really important component when you talk about being effective and being able to have outcomes, is if it's a priority, right? Does the program pass the smell test? Is it worth the paper it's written on? And have you dusted it off lately? A lot of times people say, oh, we've got something, but it's over on, I think it's on a shelf somewhere. Yeah, we really have it, but nobody listens to it or nobody follows it, right? So it's great to have a program, but it's got to be implemented. It can't be just something that, oh, I think we have something, I'm not sure. Yeah, we say we do, but not really. So you have to think about that. It can't just be, well, we've got it, but I don't know much about it. The program should not be chasing. It should not be behind your incidents. It shouldn't be where you're constantly looking at, I've got 5 incidents and I've got to go deal with this. It should be, hey, our numbers are getting better because we're ahead of the game, right? It shouldn't be that afterthought. Okay, it should always be going forward facing. And one thing that I think is probably extremely important is it's got to have management support. A lot of people that we work with will tell us that when management is not on board, that is their biggest hurdle, because the employees see that management's not on board and supportive. So unfortunately, that has a trickle-down effect. And another key component is 100% of your employees. A lot of times we make the mistake of only doing this targeted group or that targeted group. Well, we only do this group because they drive 100% of their time. Or we only do this group because, well, they're younger. And I always tell people, every age group and every demographic is represented. So you can't say only this age group or this demographic, because they're all represented. And so, and again, I made a comment earlier about on and off the job matters, family members matter. And I know a lot of companies used to send information home, like in the paychecks, in their payroll stuffers. We're starting to see that happen again because the companies realize the value of the family. So they're thinking about their health and wellness and safety and how they're making it a part of their health and safety management system. And they're figuring out how to make it where, maybe they do a health fair and they include the families. or they have different presentations, or they send information home because they know it's costly what happens off the job. It's also costly if that employee's child, who might be a teenager, is in a crash and is in the hospital. That employee's not at work. Also hits your fringe rates. So we always tell them, think a little bit differently about how you want to make safety. And not only that, if your employee is taking the information home, his family's safer, right? You want him to know that it goes it goes beyond just your employee, that you care about their families. So think a little bit about that top-down approach and that trickle factor, right? You got to think about empowering those employees. Remember when I said everybody is responsible for safety? It's everybody's job. Those employees have to be empowered. There's a difference between demanding and empowering your employees. You want to engage them. They are part of your solution. They're a part of the process. You want to bring them along for the ride. You also have to educate them, right? How can they be a part of the process if we don't educate them? You have to equip them as well. You've got to make them knowledgeable. Co-pilots' rights. That's a big one that I say, because you know what? You have coworkers that ride together. Those coworkers need to speak up, right? They need to see something, say something. If they see something, they need to bring it up. They need to say, hey, I care about you and I care about me in the vehicle too. So don't do that. Self-evaluation. We're in a time of COVID, and it used to be that sometimes we would be monitoring our employees when they would drive. We would do, monitoring assessments. Now with COVID and our environment and keeping people kind of separated, we don't have that as much. So what does self-evaluation look like? How can you make it where your own employee is evaluating themselves? How do we empower them? How do we engage them? How do we equip them? How do we help them understand how to evaluate their own driving? Again, they're a part of our solution, but they also have to be a part of the process to be a part of that solution. It's a real important thing. I want to talk about a few missteps, right? Sometimes safety meetings, they're filling time instead of purpose. I'm going to say that again. Filling time instead of purpose. A lot of times we're like, safety meetings, 1 hour. We always have 1 hour safety meetings, and this is what we're going to do. You hire a talking head, somebody you've not vetted. You're just checking a box and killing time. Well, a TED Talk can be done in 8 minutes and extremely effective. And I've heard people say, oh, I can stretch this topic for as long as you want. What do you want, right? Well, is that better for your employees? Did we get filling time or did we get purpose? And I want to be real clear with this. Just because you had 10 minutes on a regular basis versus this hour, which was more effective, right? Purpose instead of filling time. A talking head you've not vetted. Is that smart? Are we checking a box? Entertaining but superficial. I've heard a lot of people speak because I've been at lots of conferences and lots of events. And I've heard somebody speak and they're really funny. Great stories. Oh, everyone is laughing. They're thinking it's great. All these gimmicks. But I always say, but so what? When you leave there, what are you going to use that you heard? What will that employee take away from that funny safety meeting? What are they going to take away? Annually. I always hear people say, oh, well, annually they're required. Well, annually we do this. And I say, that's great. Do they only drive once a year? Do we only care about the topic once a year? And so when we only do it, a one and done is what I call it, one and done, or only certain groups, we're missing the mark because we're not going to be effective. We're not going to change behavior. And remember that slide where I said about 90% of crashes are human error and we have control of that? It's going to be a lot harder for those employees to remember much when we do it annually for maybe that hour. And again, a lot of times that's just checking a box, filing a piece of paper to say somebody was in attendance. I always tell people, what's the difference in education versus training, right? Or a meeting versus training. What's the difference, right? A meeting has an agenda. A training has learning objectives. There's a difference there. An agenda versus learning objectives. Okay? I always tell people kind of think of it like this. If I was potty training a child, I'm going to want the learning objectives because I don't want 20-year-olds still wearing diapers. I've got an objective. I want those toddlers out of diapers or out of pull-ups, right? I want them to be potty trained. That is my objective. So that's the difference between a meeting and a training. And your goal should always be a training. Your goal, don't call it a safety meeting, call it a safety training, right? Your goal should always be that there is a learning objective. You want something to happen as a result of what they just heard. So I hope you get that one, because I think it's a really important one. Tools. You have to have lots of tools. I always tell people, now I know duct tape's a great tool, but it doesn't solve everything. And you got to have the right tools. And if you've heard me speak before, I always talk about the difference in the plungers. One's for a sink and one's for a toilet, right? You've got to use the right plunger for the right job. The red one's for a sink, that black one's for a toilet, right? If you use the wrong plunger for the wrong place, is it effective? Maybe not, maybe. Not as effective, right? You got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox. I always tell people, one thing is great, but having way more at our disposal is way more important, because you can pick and choose what works. A one-size-fits-all philosophy. It's really important that we don't use a one-size-fits-all philosophy. That's why having a lot of tools and using the correct tools are important. Some people are visual, some are auditory. People have different learning styles. And when we only use a one-size-fits-all and only use the one tool, we are not probably very effective. So we need to think about that just a little bit, okay? And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And another thing is communication, right? How are we going to make communication effective? It needs to be continuous. Remember how a minute ago I said the word annually? Annually is not effective. Our communication has to be continuous. It should be an ongoing dialogue. You can capture every 2 minutes. You don't always have to have an hour. Everyone's like, we can't afford to have our employees off the job an hour a month. We cannot do that. You can capture every 2 minutes. Visually, there's no minutes there. And again, communication should go to 100% of your employees. When you have an employee that runs out for an errand, goes to pick something up, that employee's driving on company time. That employee's driving to the airport, getting on a plane, in a rental car. That's driving for your company. When you want to talk with, not at. I had someone real excited. He told me one time that he gets this, monthly newsletter from their, industry publication, and he reads it to those employees every month. Okay. And I'm just sitting there in my mind going, you read at them, you read it. So first of all they hear, they don't see anything, and you're going to read at them. So it's really important that we talk with them, not at them. They should be a part of that dialogue. Again, remember, engage them. I want to talk a little bit more about these keys because they're so important. The toilet tabloids that we do monthly, and I use this as an example because it's something that, again, is visual, doesn't take them off the job, and they see it, right? But what do we know from marketing? Marketing, because I was doing some research a little while back, and it said the retention rate from what they read in these bathroom flyers is 84%. And the read rate was between 95 and 100, that they like it, and that it's repetitive. So it keeps reinforcing it. Now, our toilet tabloids are monthly, so they stay in there for a month. Got a captive audience, and then you got their undivided attention. So to know that these are viewed positively and the retention rate is good, it's a win-win. And again, nobody was pulled off the job, and it wasn't that annual 1 hour. But again, it's that visual. A looping file. One reason why we put this together was the city of Tulsa had actually taken our safety coach cards and they cut them apart, and they had at their safety training facility one of the safety cards with the question, then the answer, and it was just looping. And I said, that is a great idea. We can do one better. So this is about 20 minutes. We've added to it over time, but what's great is it can go on any monitors. So a lot of companies that have fleet vehicles, right? They may have this monitor looping, and when people go get their keys to the vehicles or they turn the vehicle in, brakes, lunch, whatever, they consistently see the safety message. There's no sound to it, but they're consistently seeing a looping file, and it's all safety. So it's reinforcing what the company wants them to know in their safety messages. And so even we know municipal courts also in the state of Texas, a lot of them have implemented using monitors to be able to put information. And so we know that they're already doing that with different posters and graphics. And so this is a great way that you're hitting your employees and maybe others that come on your facility. So again, not taking them off the job. It's not an annual thing. and it's visual, but they're consistently seeing it. So it's a really great tool to have. So let's see, what else do I have for you? 2 minutes. When we talk about capturing those 2 minutes, and you may be familiar with the safety coach cards that we have, anything along those lines is just absolutely fabulous. You know, when you have water cooler talk, or you've got a few minutes before a meeting, and you know what, here's the deal. People want meetings to start on time, right? Begin your meeting with a safety talk. And a lot of companies will have a quick minute of something. Why not capture that 2 minutes and do a Q&A? And when it comes to engagement, why not rotate who's going to do it in your company, right? And you're going to equip your employees by giving them like a safety coach card. I know Cindy has shared before about how some companies have actually passed a specific like 3 cards out a week to each different department so that every department was having the same conversation that week. Great idea, right? But again, it's 2 minutes. We're not talking about an hour. We're talking 2 minutes, capturing every 2 minutes. That's how we're going to change behavior. Again, 90% of our crashes, which again causes fatalities, are human error, and we are in control of that. And this is one way we can capture those quick 2 minutes. A fun way that I like to do a lot of teaching is I use Kahoot. Now, Kahoot is really inexpensive to use. There's a lot of other games and online sources to be able to do a game. It's like a game show version to be able to do something. I love to use it. One reason is that I actually use the kids version because it's kind of fun. It's got music. What happens is you ask a question, and then the audience has so long to lock in their answer. Then it shows the answer on the screen, and the participants can all use whatever name they want to choose, right? And they can pick avatars. They can pick any name they want to. But what they like about it is the competition, because they start seeing their eyes around the room, and a lot of times they want to beat somebody else. But the great thing about it is you're going to flip your learning style. So you ask a question, you put options of choices on that pop up that they get to select, and they use their cell phones or a laptop. And I've yet to find an opportunity when everybody did not have a cell phone or a laptop where they couldn't engage in this. But what's great about it is you ask the question, they give an answer, and then you have dialogue. You have the opportunity to talk about it and why the right answer is what it is, right? It's great and people enjoy it. It's a great way to flip the learning style. A lot of times we use a PowerPoint. We've got something up and we talk about it. This totally flips it. People like assessing what they already know. No, you don't want to make people feel bad. You don't want to make people feel like they don't know something. But what you do want them to know is, hey, let's have some fun with it. Again, engage. People like learning. And I can tell you there's been times I've taken it to different conferences, and I'm always amazed at how much people enjoy it and like the style. So I try to throw it in often. I get asked all the time, hey, what did you use? I think that's really great. And I've had a lot of people say, we're actually stealing that. I say safety is steal worthy. Any idea you get from somebody else, steal it and utilize it. This is just one tool. There's a lot of other ones. I tend to go for the fun ones because that's my style and I want people to enjoy it, and it's got fun music and it's got fun colors. So yeah, it may be a little bit elementary, but people do enjoy it. So again, remember, engagement helps employees retain that information, and that's your goal. Okay, what about on-demand learning? Well, first of all, we've all experienced COVID now. We've got a lot of people working remotely, but even working in a location like an office, remotely, in the field, what's great about on-demand learning is they can do it at their pace, quick and easy. I know we've got several on our website, and we're actually getting ready to unload a whole, several more and some other different modules. They're quick, they're easy. Several of them give you a certificate at the end, which companies like. We found the other day that there's companies that will ask their employees to take one of these and then show them their certificate. We didn't know people were doing that, but it's great. But think about how you can find engaging ways that you, again, are asking them to do something that's quick and easy and is continuous, ongoing, and reinforcing those topics you want them to know, right? So I made a comment earlier about that it's got to be a management down philosophy, and it truly does. I find that when employees are talking about how they struggle, sometimes it's because, they're not invested. Management doesn't necessarily follow the rules, so you tend to see that it's got that trickle-down effect. So you need participation and involvement at all levels of the organization. And it's important that whatever the rules are, they apply to everybody across the board. And so that's a really key component. So getting your management involved is important. Another thing about policies. Those policies need to be clear, comprehensive, enforceable, and communicated and understood, right? If they don't understand them, how are they going to be able to do it? If we don't remind them, how are they going to know? And so all employees need to know the expectations. And only doing it when they're hired isn't really good enough. So think about that. Only doing it when they're hired and then go through new employer orientation is not enough. This should be something that we are doing reminders about and we're talking about and we do enforce. I know on our website, we do have a sample driver policy. There's a lot of other ones out there as well. So think about what you want and what you're going to enforce and make sure that your legal team reviews it as well. Think about employees who drive for work purposes, company vehicles, those rental cars, their personal vehicles. You want those employees to understand what is the expectation and what's the policy. It's also important that you're doing a motor vehicle record check. And I know some companies hire companies to do that, some insurance companies, but it's important that you know that they're being checked. Sometimes companies will say, oh, we pull them about every 3 to 5 years. Okay, is that good enough? Is it working for you? I don't know. But it's really important that you're looking at those annually and you're aware of whether your employees have citations or violations and what you allow. What's the number that you're going to allow? And is it on or off the job, right? Earlier, I made a comment about data should drive what you do. And I have been where companies have taken just a blank piece of paper to write details down on a crash. Now for us, we developed one based on simply on the crash report, the state crash report, because there was so much good information there. You don't have to use all the boxes, but the data will tell you what's going on. Was your employee fatigued? Were they tired? Do we know that maybe they're driving 2 hours to get to the job site every day? And so when they're doing that, essentially, they're now working about a 12-hour day every day. I mean, what do you know? Did they have a cold? Were they taking over-the-counter cold medication? Was it impairing? These are important things to find out and to ask. What are all the details? And so having a really good form or incident form is really helpful. Having a form you don't fill out, not helpful. A blank piece of paper, not helpful either. Again, data should drive and data is going to show you. Making assumptions is probably not the most effective way to do anything. And so every single crash should be reviewed and you need to determine the cause. It's really important. Every crash, doesn't matter who it is, every crash. All crashes, regardless of the severity, should be reported. Okay? It's real important. Doesn't matter the severity. Near misses might even be a good thing to have a conversation about, but the crash reporting and investigation is a key part of knowing your data. So if you want to have a comprehensive transportation safety program, you have to know why and what you're doing. You've got to have some disciplinary action strategy. What is it going to be? I always tell people, if you don't know, maybe look to a like company and ask them what they're doing. A lot of times you belong to associations. See what their suggestions are. I always say looking at other best practices are always helpful. What about your disciplinary action? Do you have a strategy? Do you need to review it and update it, right? It's really important to not make this an afterthought as well. It should be an important component. I like talking about this because I think it's important. Positives decrease negatives. When we talk about an incentive program, I'm not talking about money necessarily. Sometimes just praise, positive words. It can be a drawing. I know a company the one that was working on their seatbelts used to write a list of, what was going on regarding their seatbelts. Nobody wanted to be on the list, right? And so they encourage people to be on the good list, right? They encourage people, but they also started doing really full fun awards for Drive Chem Emmys and some different things. They really started making it fun. And I encourage you to find inexpensive to no cost ways to reward and, people like hearing their name called. People like being acknowledged for doing the right thing and for doing things well. And so think about how you can acknowledge people. I always encourage companies to think beyond the annual safety meeting. Sometimes they'll have a safety banquet, and they like to do all these different things. That's great, but that's an annual thing. And I always say, what can you do weekly or monthly? Department-wide, company-wide. What are the different ways that you can say attaboy? Think about that. What are the different ways you can say attaboy? I know our company uses something called Kazoo, and they were mentioning the other day in a staff meeting how about almost 100% of the employees participate in it, where they're giving kudos to coworkers. Again, how do you recognize people for doing the right thing? When you focus only on the problems, the incidents, what we're doing wrong instead of what we're doing right, we're not reinforcing what we want them to do. So it's a real good opportunity to, again, train, educate, and engage, but also acknowledge what they're doing well and they're doing right. So think about that. So you want to minimize your incurrence, right? You got to think about implement and enforce, and review and improve. If it's not working for you, why not? You need maybe another set of lenses. Does somebody else you work with, can they look at it objectively? Can they look at it differently? Why is it not working? What are we doing? How can we change it? You want to be effective. I always say, why do it if we're not going to be effective and we're not going to have impact, right? Your goal is to minimize those occurrences. A road safety program is so important in a company. It controls your costs. It reduces the number of crashes and the cost of those crashes, liability, exposure liability. It can reduce your crash rate up to 50%. So think about that a lot when you think about, I want to be effective. Think a lot about why we're doing it. Not because we have to do it, but because it helps our company. The biggest thing that I know Cindy and I always end a lot of times when we're doing our presentations is we always end with, there are no do-overs. And sometimes people like to use the expression, I wish, hindsight's 20/20. We don't get a chance to do things over sometimes. And so we've got to think about that. That's really important. I know a lot of safety leaders that have said they've had to notify loved ones of an incident or a fatality, and they never want to have to do that again. And so remember, when we talk about safety, we sometimes don't get that second chance. So we really want to think long and hard about the safety programs we do and make sure that they're effective and they're impactful. One thing when we talk about training and education that benefits, any of your employees that are safety leaders, managers, risk managers, HR, anything along those lines, I encourage you to attend any of the free webinars or trainings that we have. We keep adding new ones, and it's interesting because we get a lot of people that will re-attend other ones, and they say it just reinforces what they heard before. It refreshes them. It reminds them. And because we do updates all the time, they see something new. So again, how do you make your game fresh? How do you stay knowledgeable on the topics you need to know? How do you keep building your toolbox, right? Keep finding opportunities that are quick and easy to engage those employees in the topics they need. And I'm sure people that work in safety leaders, department managers, they're all looking for quick and easy ways. And so even if your head person is sharing information out, I know there's one company or one city, one municipality, and it's interesting, every time he gets information, he'll carbon us and he'll show how he sends it out to his entire team in safety, because he's reminding them of all these opportunities that they can take advantage of, and he's encouraging them, hey, you can get more information. Here you go. This helps you build your safety program. So again, this is just one little way, but I want to remind you that it's an important way to take advantage of something that doesn't cost you anything, but helps build your safety program. And so I just want to remind you that you are an important part of your transportation safety program. And I'm happy, I don't know if Deanne shared these slides as a handout for you or not, but I'm happy to share some of these things so you can think again about some of those key components and those tools that will help you have an effective program at your company. And so I thank you for joining us today. And Deanne, I'm going to turn it over to you because I can't see any questions in the chat window.
Okay, well, we do have just a couple of questions, and as our participants are typing in any final questions, I also put the evaluation link in the chat function. So as you're leaving today, after we're finished answering any final questions, if you'll click on that link and complete the evaluation, we would love to have any feedback or any final comments from you with today's presentation and topic. So the first question is, if a company doesn't have a safety program, what would be the first step that they should take, or what should they do first?
Well, who have we identified to work in safety, right? Who have we identified? Who's going to work on safety for us, right? Is it one person? Is it a team? You know, how do they want to structure it? I always say find a like-minded company. There's a municipality in Texas that we work with a lot, and there's a lot of times people will ask us questions, and I'll pair them up with somebody that's very similar to them, because when they're asking questions, who better than to give them some advice on how they did it to be successful, right? What were the steps that they did? So I always say, do you have other colleagues at other companies or your industry that you can say, what did you guys do? Now, again, you may not follow all their steps, but the first thing is to determine how are we going to structure it? Is it going to be one person? And what's your knowledge base, right? Find opportunities to learn more about the topic and figure out how you can infiltrate it. Because I got news for you. You don't want to just be so gung-ho, you take over everything, right? You want to introduce that to the employees. Do you have a safety team? Sometimes there's safety committees. That's a great way to get started because your employees can give you a lot of input. So I do encourage a safety committee, and I also encourage you to reach out to a like-minded company or a colleague who can give you pointers for what they've done, because they can also tell you what have been some of the landmines, what have been the problems, why do they not do something. So it's always great to get advice from somebody else as well.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And then our last question is, how often should a company review their safety plan and or their safety policies?
You know, I would do it yearly. I would make it an annual thing. Now, with that being said, if you all of a sudden see that you've had a rash of crashes or you've had, you know, a lot of incidents, and you go, hold on a minute, we need to stop and think about this, right? What's different? What's going on? Again, that data. Look at that data, but annually, at least annually, should be a great opportunity to sit down with that, you know, that magnifying glass and say, what's working for us? What new tools do we need, right? And think about this too. Your companies and your employee base will have some turnover and some change. So you may think you've already done it, but others won't have heard it. So just think about that a little bit, but think about that annually. Think of it like you do, you know, yearly, like when you change out your batteries for your smoke alarms, right? Think of it as an annual process. It shouldn't be long and laborious, but it should give you an idea of, hey, this is working pretty good, or we might want to think about this. So I always say, and again, getting some of your safety committee involved, because maybe you are in charge of safety and you think, hey, this is perfect. I think it's great. But what if the employees don't necessarily like it? So I always think it's great to get a few more people's outside perspective as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. Today's session was very informative. Thank you to the participants. We hope you enjoyed today. Please make sure that you follow up with the evaluation. We will be following up with you all to make sure that you did receive, that you will receive the slide from the presentation today. And with that, that concludes the webinar for today. Again, we thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and please make sure you complete the evaluation. Thanks and have a great day.